Hi, my name's Tom. I'm one of the leaders here, and it's a privilege to look at the Bible together today. Now, there are a few parts of the Bible that seem soaked into our culture, even in a relatively post-Christian country, and today's passage is one of them. Now, if this sounds like a bit of a surprise, we're taking a little break from our journey through Matthew's Gospel for the rest of this month. And the goal is to have some reflections from the Psalms, which are sort of the hymnal of ancient Israel. Over 150 different poems written by different people and covering a wide range of topics. Psalm 23 is maybe one of the most well-known, and it's often read at funerals. But it's not only about death, it's about belonging. And I wonder if part of the reason that this psalm continues to resonate across centuries and across cultures is because it answers a quiet ache in us. Where do I belong? Who really sees me, knows me, cares for me, leads me? In a world where so many of us feel untethered, relationally, emotionally, spiritually, Psalm 23 offers a surprising and beautiful answer. So let's listen as Liz comes to read it for us. And you can grab a Bible if you like and read along.
You'll find Psalm 23 on page 555 of the Church Bibles. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thanks, Liz. Does that sound any better, or should I switch to this guy? How does that sound? Is that a little better? Cool. Thank you, Liz, for that. There's several pictures that David gives us in this psalm, and they're worth looking at individually. And the first section focuses on pastoral imagery, farm life, rural scenes that would be instantly familiar to any Israelite reader, and perhaps less familiar to some of us. I grew up in a decaying suburb outside a failing city in a region of America known as the Rust Belt. I promise you could drive for miles around where I grew up and not see any sheep. But still, we went on holiday last month, and we spent part of it staying in this little converted barn on a working farm in the Peak District, about a dozen miles from Buxton, if you know where that is. And this is a bit of another world for me. I got to hang out with those guys. My daughter enjoyed saying hello to the sheep and this little dog who hung around the sheep. It's a different world for me, particularly looking at all those animals and the life there. The farmer had over 500 sheep, and he was busy shearing them during this season. Apparently, in his prime, he said he could shear several hundred sheep in a day. Just wild, right? Different world. Let's take this psalm apart a little bit by bit. David is identifying the Lord as his shepherd. He's placing himself in the sheep role. So let's talk about the nature of sheep then. What are they like? Well, first of all, they've got a reputation for being, well, not too bright. It's not really their fault, it's just how they are. Combine relatively poor eyesight with a fearful temperament, and you've got an animal that is prone to wander off and also generally incapable of looking after itself. Now, a farmer who may or may not have hosted a car talk show in a previous life says, sheep are belligerent and want to die. They look at a fence and think, I'm going to put my head in that and cut it off. Now, that's not exactly the most flattering thing for David to compare himself to, but that's exactly where he goes. And remember, David wasn't raised in palace courts. Remember his job before he became king? He was a shepherd. He knows this life. He knows exactly what sheep are like, and the more honest he is about himself and the ups and downs of his own life, he's making that connection. What else are sheep like? Well, they run away. A lot, as it turns out. Some of you may be familiar with the author James Rebanks. He's a farmer in England who's written several books just on what life is like in his part of the world. And in his book, The Shepherd's Life, he writes that his father used to say that sheep are like water. They find the weakest point and get through. They don't have a sense of direction. They see a nice bit of grass, and so they walk towards it. They eat, and they do this again and again until they've wandered away from the herd. And finally, sheep are vulnerable. In terms of animals on the average farm, and again, I've spent a little time here, I can verify this, most of them have some defense mechanisms built in, right? Cows have big horns. Horses have gigantic, scary feet to kick you with. Roosters are surprisingly violent. But sheep, they're fluff. They're easy targets for foxes, wolves, even human sheep stealers. They put up little resistance. What does this all say? Sheep need a shepherd. They may not know it, they may not acknowledge it, but they definitely need a shepherd. And what kind of shepherd does David say that God is? See, sheep don't know what's best for them, so they need a wise shepherd. David says that the Lord guides his sheep, that he has their best interests in mind. Sheep may not know what's best for them, but their shepherd does. When James Rebanks says that sheep are like water, finding the weakest point, he follows up that a shepherd is someone who always watches out for that gap that the sheep try to get through. Several hundred years later, Jesus would use the role as a shepherd to describe his own work. He says in John chapter 10, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. We said that sheep like to run off. They don't have a good sense of direction. They need a shepherd who will guide them. Look at our psalm, the language that David uses. He leads me. He guides me. You see, the shepherd leads the sheep to green pastures. But notice the setting in verse 4, the darkest valley. Ancient translations of this psalm, and several modern ones, translated this as the valley of the shadow of death. And as such, this psalm has been one of the most read portions of the Bible at funerals in the last few centuries, and it's certainly not a bad passage to read. There's much about God's nature on display here, but I think there's more to it than that. Notice the NIV now translates it as darkest valley. The image here is of a shepherd leading his sheep through a dangerous place where there might be predators or difficult terrain. David doesn't see this pointing to a sort of end-of-life scenario, but rather something of the dark moments that we sometimes go through. Some of you with children or grandchildren might be familiar with the Jesus Storybook Bible's version of this psalm. It calls this the dark, scary, lonely places. It's possible he's speaking of firsthand experience as a shepherd here, the difficulty of leading sheep through a dangerous situation, one with real risk. But it's also something he's lived through as a human. Being hunted, having to go into hiding. Now, what might this look like for us? Any number of things. Some of us may have been in and out of dark valleys, and we know that there's an end to them. Others might be stuck in the middle of one, hoping that there's going to be a way out. What David reminds us here is that if you belong to the shepherd, you're not on your own. If you belong to God, you don't have to fear evil. If we go back to Pat's talk last week, if you missed it, I really recommend checking it out, by the way. Jesus is someone who profoundly understands what it means to suffer. He suffered immensely on our behalf. This doesn't mean that the valley won't be scary, but it does mean that your shepherd has walked this road before, and he's walking it with you now. Finally, we said that sheep were vulnerable. Thankfully, David presents a shepherd who is a protector. I think that shepherds have, possibly due to the nativity play thing, been reduced in our cultural imagination to small people between 3-4 feet tall, wearing a dressing gown and a tea towel on their heads some morning in December. It's a cute image, right? But it's maybe not the full image, because shepherds are tough. You don't mess with shepherds. They had to be tough. They had to fight wolves and other predatory animals to keep them away from their sheep. They had to fight off people trying to steal their sheep. And this is what the sort of rod and staff language is about. There are two different things here. The rod is like a short club. Its primary purpose is to clobber the living daylights out of anything that would mess with the sheep. The staff is more like what you might imagine, the thing on the left there, the traditional shepherd's crook, as we know it today. It's not just a walking stick. It's there to nudge the sheep on a path. There's a discipline angle there, but the crook at the top gave the shepherd a bit of extra reach in case he had to pull back a sheep that had fallen off the path. So it's both a kind of proactive and reactive tool. These tools are part and parcel of the shepherd's job to keep the sheep safe, both from their enemies and themselves. But the shepherd imagery isn't the only way that David wants us to think about God. In fact, the next verse might feel like quite a shift. We've been walking through pastures and valleys with a strong, protective shepherd leading the way, but now the setting changes. We're no longer in the field or on the path. We're at a table. And God is no longer described as shepherd, but as a generous host. Look at verse 5. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. At first glance, this might seem like a bit of a jarring shift from sheep in the pasture, but it's not. It's telling us even more about the character of our shepherd. It's telling us that the same God who defends us with the rod and staff also welcomes us with oil and with wine. The same Lord who leads us through valleys prepares a feast for us, even in the presence of our enemies. David is showing us not just the strength of God's care, but the richness of it. Not just protection, but provision. Not just survival, but abundance. So we're leaving the pastoral imagery and coming to one of hospitality. And those of us who have been to this part of the world, you'll know something of what Near Eastern, Middle Eastern hospitality is like. I remember getting off a plane in Tel Aviv. It was a long flight. I was pretty hungry. My friend had picked me up at the airport. He said, let's go to a little place that he liked to eat in Jaffa. It was July, so we went up on the roof. And no sooner we sat down, that's AI, don't worry, but it's how I remember it. We sat down, and somehow about 20, 25 plates of delicious food, olives, hummus, baba ganoush, all sorts of other delicious things were placed in front of us. We didn't order it. It's just the custom. Looking after your customer, making him or her feel welcome in your space. The idea here is not just of generosity, but abundance. Look how the verse ends. My cup overflows. These aren't measly drams. This is God rolling out the good stuff in abundance. And look at the context here. In the presence of my enemies. This sounds so foreign to our logical minds. If I were making a list it would probably read something like, exit dark and horrible valley, tick, have dinner. But that's not the image that David gives us. He's saying that God's provision and God's care are there for us exactly in the midst of troubles and suffering. It may not be an ace dinner party. It might be a text from a coworker that came through just when you needed it. It might be a friend turning up with a bottle of wine when you're feeling lonely. We heard last week from my father-in-law experiencing a stark deliverance from a particularly painful episode early on following his cancer diagnosis. Something that came about after people began praying for him. I could go on. I can't promise you, and no honest Bible teacher can promise you, that you won't go through trials. It's part of what it is to be in a sinful world marred by sin. But if you belong to Jesus, if you've repented of sin and trusted in him to save you, I can promise you that you won't go through it alone. And what's more, you'll have a Savior with you who understands exactly what it means to wrestle with anguish. Let me give you a few examples. Jesus knows what it's like to be tired and weary. The incarnate Christ knows what it's like to be tired like we get tired, to work all day, struggling to stay awake. Jesus experienced hunger, thirst, discomfort, and pain. All the physical issues we're plagued with, hitting our thumb with a hammer, being hungry, a pulsing migraine. In his incarnation, in coming to earth as a human, Jesus experienced these things and more. The New Testament shows us that Jesus wasn't using his divine power to alleviate human experience. Third, Jesus was subject to sadness, loneliness, the pain of abandonment and betrayal. When we see Jesus in the Gospels, we recognize that he's often heartbroken by the separation between him and others. He knows, for instance, what it's like to be disowned by family. Further, at the culmination of his earthly ministry, nearing in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's abandoned again by his friends in his moment of anguish. And finally, Jesus was subject to the thing we all probably fear the most, death itself. In his incarnation, Jesus has wrestled with everything that physical life can throw at us: fatigue, illness, pain, and death. What I mean here is that there isn't a category of physical human experience that Jesus didn't experience from cradle to grave. And when you wrestle with these things, when you feel like another day, maybe even another minute, is just too much, and your prayer is just a cry of sheer desperation, you are praying to a Savior who's been there. He understands, he cares, and he's with you. And if you're in a darkest valley moment just now and you feel particularly alone, I'd like to encourage you to reach out to the pastoral support team, anybody who is up here, a lovely bunch of people who want to talk with you, to pray with you, try and help. And I want to be clear, in God's purpose and plan, you may not see delivery from particular things on this side of eternity. But what is clear in this psalm is that we, as part of the herd, will experience God's presence. In the hospitality David describes, we'll see God's provision. And finally, we can rest in God's promise. Look at verse 6. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I see two parts in this verse. It starts with this idea of goodness and love following us. What a profound phrase. I think before I became a parent, I had never really known what it was like to be followed. Maybe some of you experienced this. It's this magical moment where your kids discover their mobility. They start crawling, they start walking, and they apply these new skills to ensuring that they're within a foot or so of you, wherever you happen to be in the house. I've gotten so used to this that I now basically check behind me whenever I take a step back, just in case I'm going to step on somebody. It might look really strange when the kids aren't around, but it's just become a habit. But that's the image David is giving us here. We don't experience goodness and love just once. In a profound moment, the psalm is saying that these things are ours in perpetuity and in abundance. And as I said before, this doesn't mean we should expect a smooth coast through life. That wouldn't make sense in light of everything he said. But what it does mean is that God's enduring presence and provision will remain with us, and they're also building toward something. Because look how David finishes the psalm. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We've moved from herd to hospitality and finally to home. And this hits pretty hard for a few reasons this week. We're in the middle of moving house. Some kind friends have come along to help us box things up, tidy up the flat, get things ready to go. Dishes are packed. We're living like undergraduates. The microwave is in high rotation. We're ready to go, but our new house isn't ready just yet. We don't have the keys. We're on a trajectory, though. We're on a path to get there. We get the keys on Thursday, but there's some work to be done. We'll spend some time getting things ready. One thing we've always done is that my daughter's room, wherever we've lived, we've always tried to have it nicely painted and decorated before she's seen it. We try to make the color and the decoration consistent so that she and her sister have a feeling of being home and belonging there, wherever we've lived. So hopefully by next Sunday, we'll almost be there with that process. What does this give? This gives a sense of expectation. That's what David is onto here. He's not just talking about the here and now, but what awaits us. It's an idea that Jesus picks up on later in the Bible. In John 14, Jesus leans into this idea when his disciples are getting a bit worried. Look what he says. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. This is the reality that David had a glimpse of in Psalm 23. It's a reality that awaits each of us who follow Jesus. That however difficult this life is, however much heartache we experience, however lonely we are, however much pain we suffer, however rejected we feel, we have a home in the end. It's been designated for us by Jesus himself. He is getting it ready for us. And it's ours forever because we are his forever. The Psalms are a rich treasury of images and poetry, and I think they're at their best when they lift our gaze up to Jesus, who fulfills what so many of the Psalms intended to illustrate in the first place. It's there to tell us that the shepherd who walked with us through the dark valleys, who laid a table for us, who has gone before us, that shepherd is establishing our forever home. The one who walked with us will one day walk us home. Is that your hope? If not, and you'd like to know more, if this has struck you somehow, please do come talk with us, talk to me. And if this is your hope, lean all the more into it. Now, at this point, I'm going to ask the musicians to come back up. We're going to sing our way through this psalm one more time in an old Scottish style. And I hope that this can be a good point of reflection and just a reminder of everything we've thought about just now.
We're going to sing this one together. So let's stand together.
In a couple of minutes, Tom is going to have a go at responding to the questions that you've been submitting on Slido. Before he does, take a moment to turn to someone nearby and share your reflections on this morning's talk, or you could discuss one of the questions that will be up on the screen. If you still want to submit or vote for any of the questions that are going to be answered, go to the Q&R on the app or use the URL that's on, or hopefully there, it's on the screen. We'll be back in a couple of minutes to look at the top questions. we're going to have a look at the questions now, but please do make time to continue the conversations that you've been having after the gathering. We don't have a lot of questions today, though. I think one more has just come in. I'm going to start with this one here. So it sounds like God uses other people to be with us through the dark valleys. How can I find out more about being there for people at Hope City?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. We've got all different sorts of teams. There's folks who try to help people pastorally, wrestling through how to think through and work through tough stuff in life. There's also things like practical support, whether it's just turning up to help somebody with a bit of gardening, turning up to help somebody look after their kids. You know, there's a lot of people who don't have support networks in a city like Edinburgh, and just being that sort of family for somebody is huge. There's also really practical ways. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's like 100 kids at Hope City Kids. What better thing to do than help invest in the future of the church in Scotland, whether or not they're your kids? Turn up, like, it's fun, you can help. Anybody can play with kids and show them that they matter to you, they matter to God. There's all different sorts of ways you can jump in here. Susie, I don't know, what are you thinking?
So first things that came to mind for me is using the prayer tool. So throughout the week, you've got access to the prayer tool that we use today, and you can be praying throughout the week just for anything that's on there. And you also have the option to press the button to say that you're praying for that person. And for me personally, I found a lot of times in the past when I've been going through something in particular that I'm struggling with, getting those emails through the week just saying that someone's praying for you has been a real encouragement and just helped me to feel like, okay, I'm not on my own in this. There are people praying for me, and that knowing that God hears that, that's really encouraging. The other thing that I was thinking was about small groups. So I think a lot of the time, if someone's going through something really difficult, they're not necessarily going to share it in this big environment here where you've got so many people. They might feel that they can't really reach out and share that openly because it could be just something that's too personal. But in a small group context, you've got the opportunity there to really build relationships and to get to know people on a much deeper level. And I think that's where people tend to then feel like, okay, they can open up a bit more and they can share something that's really on their heart. And then as, you know, members of the small group, you can then pray for them, but you might also be able to help them in more practical ways because you can then find out a bit more about what would be helpful to them. So I think that's where my mind went with that one.
Yeah, and practically speaking, if you want to know who to talk to about these things, anybody who's been up here on the front, small groups, Andrea, you talk to Andrea if you want to get involved in a small group. Ruth McIntosh, are you here? She's probably out with the kids. Talk to Ruth if you want to talk about more practical side of things. Rachel Kerr is the person to talk to for the pastoral support team. Basically, come find me if you're looking for people. I'll make sure you find the right person.
Great, thanks, Tom. A couple of requests for more old psalms and old school bangers.
Yeah, right?
I'm sure the music team will be taking note of that. There's one more that came in just as we came up, Tom. So how can we take more comfort from our shepherd when so often we do wander and forget him, and when the dark valleys are really awful?
Yeah, I think remembering that Jesus understands human suffering because he suffered as a human, and knowing that he is not some sort of distant divine force, but someone who has wrestled with these things as you have. That really helps for me. And also the reality of wandering, it's a tough one, but I think leaning into Jesus, but also being with his people is really huge. Finding help and support, like Susie was saying, in the context of a small group, if you can establish a sort of accountability framework with somebody you really care about and trust and who you can help as well. I think communion with Christ and his people is probably the best way to navigate a dark valley, and sometimes you won't want to do that in the middle of a dark valley, depending on what it is, but I think all the more it helps. Even for me, I have a little playlist on Spotify when I'm really feeling down. And sometimes I just need to hear the words. Can't bring myself to sing them, but I need to hear them. Little things like that, I think, can make a big difference. I don't know. How about you, Susie?
I mean, this one, I suppose, reminded me of a time in my life when I felt really hurt by the church. So I think, I definitely was wondering. I was kind of putting up walls. I didn't really want to engage with anything that was Christian because I felt like that's where my heart was coming from. But looking back, I can definitely see how God placed a lot of people around me, and it sort of ties in with what you're saying about being with God's people. It wasn't something I was necessarily looking for, but God had placed those people in my life in a way that I couldn't really escape them, whether if I wanted to or not. So I think looking back, I see that a lot of my comfort in that time was coming from God's people, even though it wasn't necessarily me that was seeking that and looking for it.
Yeah, that leading and guiding kind of thing too. Yeah. No, it's really helpful. Any others come in?
Let me see. Got one here. It's going up. Can you elaborate on verse 5? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, as sometimes God may not defeat the enemies before me.
Yeah, God may or may not defeat enemies. We're actually going to look at a different psalm next week where the psalmist actually basically begs God to deal with his enemies. You may find deliverance from this in the courts of human justice or in things coming to a point of healing, but you might not. What I think this idea of God's provision says is that God isn't going to leave you alone in the dark valley in the struggle. God will continue to provide for you in and through it. I think that's what David's getting at here. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, Tom. Thanks. I think that's all we have time for today. So can you just remind us of your main point before you go?
You have a shepherd. You're not alone. Lean into him and follow him.
Great. Thank you, Tom.